All right, welcome back to another episode of Through Their Eyes. We are here in Season 5 talking about my favorite Bible passage, and we've had 8 guests selected. We are near the end of our season together now. We're getting closer to that time. It is the day that we're talking with Mark Teske about his favorite Bible passage, and he gave us several to choose from, and we selected this one that may seem like a strange one at first when you see it. It may not seem like one that you would expect to be covered, but the more you look at it and the more we get into it and what we've discussed, it has a lot of merit to what we're talking about and a lot of what we need to be thinking about with sacrificial love and the sacrifice that benefits us each and every day. So, a couple of housekeeping matters before we get into the panel discussion. We do want to thank the House to House Studios for giving us the time this summer to be here and record and have these episodes coming out. We're grateful that they have opened up their doors to us, and we're thankful for all the work that they do. They have a lot of great content that you can find on their social media links and YouTube channel. We encourage you to check that out in the show notes below. We also want to thank the Memphis School of Preaching for overseeing the work of the Scattered Abroad Network. We could not do what we do without them, and we're grateful that all of us have the privilege of working with our alma mater at the Scattered Abroad Network, or SAN as we typically will call it. And finally, we are ultimately grateful that we have the opportunity to sit down and study. What a privilege it is to study the Bible and have the chance to make that be a career as we do this. So as I stop looking at you and start looking at the panelists, pray for me, please. These guys look something fierce. Hey, Wayne.
Hi, Michael.
Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you.
Wayne has to be here, so we'll avoid him right now. Mark, Dad.
Always a pleasure.
Good to see you.
Wayne and I talked for a while last night, and we decided that we were absolutely not going to abuse your youth and inexperience and take advantage of that. So,
well, that's good because I was afraid that I'd have to have the nursing home on speed dial for you two. So,
we got
some
you,
people's
buddy.
kids.
That's right.
Some people's kids.
Well, Mark, we know you very well, Wayne and I. People at home may know you and may know some of the work that you do, but for those who don't, introduce yourself, let them know. Obviously, you're my father-in-law. I married Megan, and so I'm grateful for that. But you do a lot of work in the kingdom too. So kind of introduce who you are and what you do for work and all of that good stuff, and then we'll get started with the verses.
Okay. I work full-time with the Good News Today television program based out of Dunlap, Tennessee. Appreciate the great elders that I have there and the work. Jim Dearman started that program, 17, 18 years ago now, was the original flagship program of the Gospel Broadcasting Network, and has continued on, had some changes along the years, but we're broadcasting right now 25 different television stations around the country, Europe, parts of Africa, and on 14 radio stations as well.
That's great. Well, certainly the opportunity to broadcast is somehow, some way, going the way of the earth in some people's minds. And we understand technology makes advances. Streaming is very popular, but there's still cable systems out there. We're glad that you're on those and doing the work that you can do in those regards. And in the radio stations, too. Obviously, radio is even more ancient in the mind of the technological advances in regard to what TV stations would be. So, yeah.
And one of the things that's been kind of interesting, people say, oh, well, nobody's listening to radio anymore. Actually, FM radio's listenership has gone up over the last several years. AM radio doesn't get nearly the airtime, but we're on all FM stations. And people do listen to that. Yeah. And the over-the-air broadcast, more and more people are actually watching that as technology changes. You know, people from their antennas get more and more channels available to them that way.
Yeah.
And its demise has been predicted for years and years. And I think it's going to outlast cable television.
Still going.
Right.
Still going.
Absolutely. And certainly, you know, technology advances, but most of it stays the same. You know, podcasting that we're doing right now is really just radio. It's just a different way that radio shows are produced and put out there, and a more affordable way in some cases to be able to do for some people, for sure. But when I try to explain podcasting to an older individual, I say, have you ever listened to the radio? talk shows. That's what podcasting technically is. It's just a different method that it's delivered. It's not done over the airwaves of radio. And so we're grateful that you're here. And what we're going to do, as we've done all season, is Wayne's going to read because I am illiterate. No, basically, I want to see if you'll get these words right. Wayne's going to read the passage, and we'll then have our discussion about it and be able to hopefully give some clearer picture on what this means and why it's one of your favorite Bible passages that you listed. So, Wayne, Hebrews 10, verses 11 through 14.
And every priest stands ministering daily and offering repeatedly the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God, from that time waiting till his enemies are made his footstool. For by one offering he has perfected forever those who are being sanctified. All right, Brother Mark.
Just a fantastic passage of Scripture. And the Hebrew writer has been building up for several chapters, and we're getting really here. This is really the climax of what he's been talking about going back to chapter 7. And he's been, in chapter 7, he introduces this idea of Jesus having a better priesthood than the priesthood that we see, the Aaronic priesthood, the Old Testament priesthood. He lays that forth that this is a better priesthood. Then in chapter 8, he transitions for a little while and starts talking about the fact that there's going to be a new covenant. Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, the Hebrew writer quotes that and says, there has always been a new covenant coming. And using that to support that. And then he starts talking about the sacrifices in the earthly tabernacle, drawing these connections for us, those sacrifices, and comparing them to the sacrifice of Jesus. And he talks about the sanctuary in heaven versus the sanctuary that we have, that they had under the Old Testament here on earth. Then as we get to chapter 10, he's dealing more with the sacrifices themselves. And one key verse that he says back in chapter 9, verse number 14, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And he's clearly laid forth, this is the better sacrifice. Better being a key word through the book of Hebrews. And then as chapter 10 begins, verse 4, it's not possible that the blood of bulls and goats could take away sins. That Old Testament system was never designed to be the end result. And, going back to that Jeremiah 31 passage that he quoted, there was always intent that there was going to be another system that God was going to have for his people. And that is what we understand as the new covenant.
And it's interesting that in chapter 9, coming in there, and as you mentioned verse 15, especially 14 and 15 there, and the idea, or especially 14, cleansing your, those could never cleanse your conscience from dead works, with dead works. Those sacrifices, those offerings were never going to accomplish that. And then he repeats that in chapter 10, verse 4, as you mentioned. And it's interesting, in verse 23 of chapter 9, he says, therefore it was necessary that the copies of the things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices. And this, like you say, this is this whole build up to, but we have the one man, that has made the sacrifice, this once for all sacrifice. We'll get to that, I know, in just a minute. And it's amazing that this whole thing is about salvation. It's about purification. It's about being redeemed. It's about the redemption that is in Christ. And all season we've been talking about the church, and we've been talking about those things that are therein, and the salvation that is there. And the book of Hebrews is interesting, or this sermon to the Hebrews is one that is, don't give up on the things that God has planned from the foundation of the world. Obviously, these things that were temporary and meant to be temporary are just shadows of. or copies of, he says there in chapter 9, verse 23.
And I think the best illustration I've ever heard to explain those Old Testament sacrifices, when you look at like Leviticus 4 and Leviticus 5, the sin offering, the trespass offering, it says there that those sins would be forgiven if they presented the offering,
right?
Which does not contradict what we have here.
Mm-hmm.
But and the best illustration I've heard to explain that, it's like pulling out your credit card to buy something. Michael buys that vest, puts it on his credit card. Is it his vest? Yes, it's his vest. Mm-hmm. The forgiveness was there for the individual, but the bill still hadn't been paid.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was when Jesus came, he proverbially paid off that credit card,
right,
and allowed that the blood of the cross to wash back and cover those sins.
Yeah.
When you think about that illustration, I think that is a good illustration for sure, because if somebody today with over 80% of Americans estimated to be in debt, and most of that would probably be credit card debt, car loan debt, house payments, and all that kind of stuff, but with 80% estimated to be in debt, what would that do for those of us that are suffering in debt if someone said, I will pay it all off, and all I need you to do in return is fill in the blank. This is it. And it's a reasonable thing that we could all accomplish. Would we jump at that opportunity? Mm-hmm. If somebody said, I will pay your debt off, I just need you to mow my lawn for the next 5 summers, we'd find a way to mow a lawn for 5 summers, because it's going to be, look at what we're benefiting and getting in return. And we look at what the New Testament teaches about, 1 John, the commandments of God are not grievous. They're not burdensome. They're not difficult to follow through. And that's what we're told, is the sacrifice is given freely, but there are some expectations that need to be done. And I love how Hebrews and Galatians are written in such a fashion to say, why would you go to something that's not the best? And we think about that all of the time. We want the best of whatever it is going to be. If you're going to put oil in your car, you want to make sure you have the best oil in your car. You want to make sure you're putting the best materials, using the best tools for the job. Now, sometimes as we look at certain things, you go the great value route. We didn't have that when it comes to this. This was not some option that we're given a sacrifice it'll get the job done, but it's not the best of the best. We were given name brand.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ has come to this earth. He is the choicest sacrifice we could have. A body's been prepared so that he could come. And I love how it's depicted in verse number 5, after the blood of bulls and goats can't take away sins. Therefore, when he came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you didn't desire, but a body you have prepared for me. And I'm here to do your will, O God. Verse 7, I'm doing this. I'm ready. And then we come into this beautiful picture of every priest stands ministering daily, offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never take away the sins. But this man, when he offered one sacrifice, sat down. His work was complete. He did what he needed to do. And I can't fathom that to the same degree as we put with credit card debt. It's a good illustration, and we all understand what we would do to get rid of our credit card debt, and we would do anything. But to fathom that someone would say, you deserve to go to prison, let's just say as another example, I'll go for you. I will take that punishment so you don't have to. We don't know of many people who would do that. We know of some that would push us out of the way of a speeding, car or bullet because they want to preserve us and protect us. You can talk about so many stories where a husband does that for his wife, a boyfriend for a girlfriend, on and on we could go with that. But we can't fathom somebody being punished on our behalf. And that's really what the death of Jesus was. It wasn't like he just pushed us out of the way of a speeding car and died on impact. He was tortured on our behalf, punished, a sacrifice. And I think that's something we talked about that you wanted to allude to about these Old Testament sacrifices and how they were behaving, and the awful, gruesome picture that today we don't have maybe in our minds as much as these people reading this would have known. So talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, those sacrifices, I mean, there were continual sacrifices going on. This was a daily occurrence, a bloody occurrence. At times, it said that the blood was just running out of the temple. You have just in the book of Leviticus, chapter 1, the burnt offering, chapter 3, the peace offering, chapter 4, the sin offering, chapter 5, the trespass offering, chapter 8, the consecration offering for the priest, chapter 14, the cleansing sacrifice for the lepers. So you get chapter 16, the Day of Atonement. All of these things going on. You also have the morning and evening sacrifices. We get that from Exodus chapter 29. So we have this continual slaughtering of these animals that, the priest, their job, they're receiving the animals and working somebody through the process. One thing that when you read through like the sin offering, the trespass offering, that the person would confess their sins, put their hands on that animal, and then they would have to take the knife and kill that animal. Without getting too graphic, animals don't care for that.
Right.
That's something that they complain about. But here you are having to inflict this pain, this punishment on this animal as a graphic representation of what sin is. And that memory that cue that, you smell, you hear, you're touching, all the senses are involved here as you're going through this practice to help drill in the point how horrible sin really is.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we miss that.
Yeah.
We come up with excuses. That was just a little white lie. Things like that. It's like, no, it's sin. It's ugly. And when we realize this great sacrifice that was required to get rid of that sin, we're going to take sin a whole lot more seriously because God certainly does.
Yeah. I mean, you think about sacrificial stuff of having to be the one to inflict that wound that would not be recovered.
Right.
Having to be the one. And the entire time that animal is crying out in pain and bleeding out, both bleating and bleeding, you're thinking, that's my fault. That's my fault. And we sometimes will have accidental pain inflicted. Years ago, my mom was trying to play with a voice changing device that we had as kids. And I was trying to pull it away from her. And she was pulling back. I was pulling toward. And then I let go. And the force of that hit her in the face. And she started to bleed from her lip. I felt like trash when that happened. I mean, I thought I have killed my mom, and it wasn't as serious as what we're talking about, but why don't I feel even worse than I felt that day with my mom when I commit a transgression? When I realized that it's as if, though I couldn't be there physically the day Jesus was put to death, we sometimes sing the song, "Can he still feel the nails every time I fail?" I don't want to cause him pain, knowing that I've got to change, but it's as if what the Bible talks about, crucifying Jesus afresh or anew. I am driving those nails into his hands. I am taking that cat of nine tails into his back. And though I didn't physically do that, it is because of me that it had to happen. And therefore, it is as good as if I did do it. And that needs to hurt me deeper than any time I've accidentally hurt somebody else physically. And we've all had moments, I think, where we accidentally physically hurt somebody, like I talked about with my mom. Wasn't intentional, but boy, it made me feel terrible when it happened. And yet sometimes, as you mentioned, we convince ourselves, it's not that big of a deal. No, a man died because of it. The Son of God was killed because of what I did. It was big enough that somebody had to lose their life so that I could be forgiven for it.
And not just somebody.
The somebody.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is God here in the flesh
Right.
on earth. That was required of him. And we see this great contrast that's set up in this passage. We have these continual Old Testament sacrifices, and then Jesus here just shows up once. This man in the text being Jesus shows up once, one sacrifice, and he sits down, mission accomplished.
Yeah.
The totality, the completeness of that sacrifice is really being emphasized here in this passage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the climax of everything that's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you were talking about a moment ago, both of you mentioned the sounds, all the things that you're hearing in that sacrifice that's taking place, and all of the senses being reached by that and the reality of that. I think that should help us understand chapter 9, verse 22 a little bit better. When he mentions, that according to the law, all things must be purified with blood. And so there was it had to be. There had to be blood shed, because of those sins. And then, though, this phrase is in there, and without shedding of blood, there is no remission. And that again, that contrasts to get us in with what Jesus has done. This once for all sacrifice is mentioned in the book of Hebrews, and what he accomplished. And so, but this man, this one sacrifice for sins forever, and like I say, sat down. He has accomplished it.
Mm-hmm.
He's accomplished what it would, because the whole point was daily. You're having to do this daily. There's still ministering taking place daily. All of this is happening according to the law. The reminder in the book of Hebrews is that we're beyond that. There's already been the once for all sacrifice made. Don't give up that. These were individuals giving that up. And so contextually, just thinking about that, but this man understanding his responsibility in this, the Son of God, willingly hearing, smelling, feeling all that pain for us. And I know we want to talk some application, and I'm gonna set you up to go there with it. All of that he went through, where does that take us?
Mm-hmm. And talking about where he went through, sometimes I think we limit that sacrifice to what happened, beginning with the scourging.
Right.
But his sacrifice began.
Yeah.
He was in heaven with the Father.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got to go down and fix this problem. Yeah. So much that he gave up, Philippians 2.
Right.
He had to empty himself just to come here. And throughout his time, throughout his ministry, Matthew records 4 different times, chapter 16, 17, 20, and 26, when Jesus says, hey, guys, this is leading to the cross. Mm-hmm. And imagine that the most difficult sacrifice a human being could endure. Jesus knew that's where this is headed, and he kept heading in that direction anyways. The night before his crucifixion, Father, if there is any other way, take this cup from me. Mm-hmm. The emotional anguish he was going through before the physical started.
Right.
And I think sometimes we minimize how much that would have affected him as he went through that.
I think about Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. That was what was promised to Adam in the garden. If you eat of this tree, you will surely die. But I think sometimes we don't do a great due diligence of talking about that the wages of sin require death too. Mm-hmm. It is death. I will die because of sin. The fact that we're dying right now is because of sin. Death was not on the table before sin entered into this world. But ironically, the way Revelation reads, Jesus was a lamb slain before the foundation of the world, meaning God knew man's inability to be perfect was going to be a problem, and that we were going to be created with free will and free choice. But therefore, the wages of sin is death, not just for me, but for Jesus Christ too. And like you said, I think that picture of Romans 6:23 of talking about it as wages, the payment for sin is death. And it's I've said sometimes to people proverbially, if you went into a grocery store and you put everything in the cart and you got to the counter and you said, well, I can't pay for this. Why'd you put it in the cart? You're saying when you put something into that grocery cart, I can pay for this. And sometimes people have said, oh, we can't afford to put that back. We're getting too close to our limit. I don't get a chance to do that when it comes to sin. I've already technically said, as you mentioned with that credit card, no, I can pay for it. I've swiped that card at the store. I'm walking out proudly with all my items. And then I realize, wait a minute, I can't pay for this. Now what? And Jesus says, well, I'll pay for it, but it's going to cost. And there's a cost on myself, obviously, but I've never, as well as I probably should, looked at Romans 6:23 and paired it with Hebrews 10 the way that it needs to be, which is the wages of sin requires death. It requires death of the person who's committed the sin, but if they want to be redeemed from that, somebody's got to take their place.
Mm-hmm. And I've asked myself the question, we have these Hebrew Christians wanting to go back to this old system.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were under that old system and, when every time we sinned, we'd have to take the walk to Jerusalem with the animal and be there, put the hands on it and see the suffering going on, smell, hear, our senses involved in that process, would we look at sin differently? And as you take that and look at the greater sacrifice that we have, it should affect us even more. But I wonder if maybe we're missing something by not having that experience.
Right.
But God provided that for us. What do we do when we gather together to partake of the Lord's Supper? We're tasting, we're smelling, we're touching in remembrance of the great sacrifice. Yeah. It's almost as if God knew we were going to need that.
Right.
And said, hey, I want you to do this every week.
Yeah.
To have that continual reminder about your sin.
Yeah.
And people are always looking for some kind of religious experience and so forth. And I always think, you're missing, you're looking for some kind of physical or spiritual, higher sensual type thing. The problem is they've not connected what God has accomplished for them, what he accomplished under the old law for a temporary, purpose to bring them to the Christ, who would then be the one making that great sacrifice, that once for all sacrifice. It is accomplished. He's sitting down on the right hand of God and now ruling in that way. And when we come together on the Lord's Day in worship and praise and adoration, and part of that, God has planned, like you mentioned, the Lord's Supper, in that there's the experience. And that experience in the gospel itself, death, burial, the resurrection of Jesus, but that experience in knowing that our sins cause that. You connect. You have to start connecting that, and the both the bread and the fruit of the vine do those things for us physically to remind us spiritually where we now are because of Christ. Henceforth, we sing the praises. We thank Him in prayer. We hear His word, and we go forth to live a better life. Right.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think as chapter 10 proceeds, verse 25 that. Probably a lot of people know by memory, not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together, making that point.
Yes.
This is, when we have that sacrifice front and center, we're not going to want to miss that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that connection to the death, burial, and resurrection, we keep talking about Romans 6, and Hebrews 10 and Romans 6 fit together like a glove. Mm-hmm. The first 4 verses, 6 verses actually, we recreate the death, burial, and resurrection. We die to ourselves when we repent of the sins. We're buried with Him in baptism. We rise to walk in newness of life. Mm-hmm. That connection is there in how we become a Christian to begin with.
When you think about we're dominion over all the beasts of the field and the beasts of the earth and all of that kind of thing, it could be easier for someone to look at a lamb being slain and think, I hate that. I hate that so much. It's awful. But not feel the pull as much as a human being who is God in the flesh, dying right in front of everybody and going, this is way more personal now than it was when it was just the lamb without blemish. It hurt. And it certainly, I don't want to act like God didn't know what He was doing. He did. It hurt to watch that lamb die. It hurt to watch those offerings be made. But to then have to witness the Son of God be brutally murdered and read these letters as they were written and realize what it meant and what it was about. It's so impressive to point out that it was an understanding of how frustrated would you feel if you're driving down the road and you see a dog that's been hit and it didn't make it, or a deer. And you'd be, oh, that's really sad. But you'd keep driving. You see a human being on the side of the road, you're pulling over. And there's that understanding of what God knew was we needed an example, a sacrifice that was perfect in its nature, that could do what those others couldn't accomplish, that would sting us even more than what that did to sting us. And it stung both ways, but certainly with Christ, it stings more. Is there anything else you want to add to this before we close out?
Just one quick thing is when Jesus, Colossians 1 tells us that he was integral in the creation process, knowing it was going to lead to the cross. He created things anyways.
Right.
That's when the sacrifice really began from his point.
That's right. Wayne, thanks for being here. I know you had to be. Mark, thanks for taking the time. Those of you at home watching or listening, we're grateful for you. You can check back on Thursday for Did That Really Happen with Mark Teske. Until then, take care and God bless.